name is Matthias Stolber. I'm with the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance, and we have projects around the globe, as many other NGOs. Strong hub here in Kenya. We have multiple projects we work with and partners we work with here in Kenya. Again, a lot of work that I'm doing is in the Amazon. I'll talk a little bit about camera technology, and again, we're talking kind of the old school camera traps. And if you look down here, there's kind of the evolution that I went through with camera traps. So the first models, was an underwater camera that was connected to a sensor with a cable, and there's a roll of film in here, 36 photos, and you have to go out every couple of days and change the film. This is the upgraded version, still film, and obviously these are the common ones that we widely use today, and then now we're moving into smart camera traps with Edge AI and identifying species on the camera. And on the right there, you see that as the camera technology evolved, so did the use of camera traps, and you see an exponential growth in publications using camera trap data. So it's really a very widely used tool in ecology and wildlife research and monitoring. So modern digital camera, off the shelf, cheap models available for probably about $120, $30 at least in the US, maybe a little more here. Nowadays we have large memories. We can have 30,000 or more images. We can collect videos. We can do time lapse. We have long battery lives, up to 9 months, so we can deploy cameras in remote areas. Don't have to go out there every couple of weeks to check them. And all the data is obviously digital. We have digital metadata, so we can really automate the processing part of the data, which allows us to do large surveys. So when I started out, 60 cameras out in a 60 square kilometer area was a lot of work. Now we're surveying 1,000, 2,000 square kilometers at a time with 200-300 cameras. So it really has allowed us to scale up to landscape levels using camera traps. And we can process all the data in a digital workflow. There's a lot of things we can do with camera traps. Basic things like species richness, how many species are there, which species are present in an area. Occupancy, which I'm going to talk a bit about today. We don't have time to cover all of these. Abundance, density estimates, especially for species where we can identify individuals, but there's some methods also for species where we can't identify individuals. We can look at activity pattern, we can look at specific resource uses, think water holes or fruiting trees or marking trees, and we can also identify behavior in camera trap videos. I'll talk about occupancy because it's one of those methods that allow us to kind of do large-scale assessments of species distributions and answering ecological questions at kind of the landscape scale. And occupancy basically is a fancy word for species distribution modeling, but we're accounting for imperfect detection. Why do we need to account for imperfect detection? Because if you put a camera at a single point, even if the species is around, there's no guarantee that the camera actually takes a photo of that species. The longer we leave the camera, the more likely we are to detect the species, but there's no guarantee even if the species is generally around. So if you put 3 cameras in an area of a couple of 100 meters, one camera might detect the species, the other 2 might never see the species in the same amount of time. So we need to account for that in the model, and the occupancy model allows us to do that by using that repeated survey data. Again, occupancy looks at the distribution of a species in a landscape. So here's an example where we have maybe some villages, we have some roads connecting the villages, and then we can start adding covariates and look at how these covariates influence the distribution of the species. So maybe there's some hunting going on around the villages. Or maybe there's an impact of roads. So we can start adding a lot of different covariates and start answering ecological questions. There's a lot of extensions of these models. We can have multi-species models where we can model the whole community in a single model. There's open models where we can look at change in occupancy over time, dynamic models, we can look at colonization, extinction, and so on. So there's a lot of questions that can be answered with this kind of model. A little bit about the design, and I think it's really important in camera trap study that you think about the design before you go out and put out cameras. There's so many times people come to me and talk to me about, oh, we have this camera trap data set, what can we do with it? And that's generally not whether you should end up. You really want to think about your research question before and choose a design that fits that question. If you have multiple covariates, you want to make sure you have enough cameras within each covariate group. So let's say you want to compare 3 habitats. You don't want to have 90% of your camera in one habitat type and only 10% in the other, because you're not going to have any statistical power. So you really want to think about your research question before you put out camera traps. And I'm saying that over and over every time I talk about camera traps, because again, I've seen so many studies that come and it's like, oh, we did this. I'm like, why? I don't know. And it's, yeah, it sounds funny, but it is, unfortunately, still reality. So typical occupancy, I would say at least 50 points. The more points you have, your point is your sampling unit. So statistical, basic statistics, the more samples you have, the better your inference, right? So generally, I would say 50, 100 points is better. You can run different blocks, you can move cameras around, but the more sampling points you have, the better. And generally, we use about 60 to 90 days we leave cameras out. Some projects run them continuously, depending on, again, it depends a bit on your question, on the species you're interested in. There is a relationship between occupancy and abundance. It's not very clear, it's not linear, so here you see one option. But you can also see that on the right there, both it depends on the home range size and camera spacing. Both of these have the same occupancy, but obviously you can see the left has a much higher abundance, but with smaller home range size, and the right we have a low abundance. So you can't really use it as a good indicator of abundance. So it's generally it's not recommended. It's really, you're looking at distribution, you're looking at resource use, you're looking at habitat use. So here's an example, and this is southeastern Peru. And this is data we collected over almost a decade. But you can start seeing, as you accumulate this data, we can really look at a landscape scale, what's going on. So we have cameras in protected areas, we have cameras in logging concessions, we have cameras in Brazil nut concessions, which is a non-timber forest product, mining concessions here, private protected areas. And then we can start really asking questions at a landscape scale instead of having a small surveys. And so you can see kind of evolution. These were some of our first surveys, and now this is a survey we can run in one single session. And here is an overlay with the jaguar, for example, and we can start seeing like the distribution. Again, this is the raw data. This is not modeled. So here we want to say the conclusion would be there's a lot of jaguars here, there's fewer here, but here we have a different setup, so we need to account for detection probability. But you can really start answering questions at a landscape level with these occupancy models. And occupancy doesn't just work with camera traps. So here's an example from Sumatra, where they do an island-wide survey of Sumatran tiger, very endangered species, or subspecies of tigers. And they divide the whole island, the remaining habitat, into cells of 300 square kilometers, go out and do track surveys. Again, tropical forest, you can't just fly and use, also use satellite images. It's a huge effort, but it can be used at that scale. And last year we published a paper where we integrated data from camera traps, GPS collars, spore surveys across Botswana, that modeled carnivore occupancy across all of Botswana and actually dynamics over time. So there's a lot of things that can be done with these models to really scale up at a large scale. I think they're very useful. Now I'm doing on time, but I want to talk a little bit about data management. So the other thing with camera traps is now you have 200 camera traps, you put them out, you let them run them for half a year, and you get 1 million photos. Now what? And Tony and Meredith are both talking about that a little bit, but I want to talk about that a little bit because it's a common problem, right? It's like, well, okay, now I spent the next 3 years looking at photos. And it's really, it's been a huge bottleneck for a lot of these studies as we scale up these camera trap surveys. So that's where machine learning comes in, and those of you who work with camera traps know that it's been a big issue in the last couple of years where new papers come out talking about machine learning. One of the most common workflows these days that is fairly reliable is basically a two-step approach. There's a machine learning model, it's called Megadetector, developed by Microsoft AI, and it's really good at detecting animal. It doesn't know any species, but it's really good at picking out an animal in a camera trap image. It's been trained on millions of photos, and it's almost 99% accurate. But it only knows 3 classes. It knows animal, person, and vehicle. What we then do is we crop this out, and we run it into a second model that's called a species classifier. So then that classifier only looks at the cropped image, so we avoid all the background information that just distracts the model, and then we can identify the species. And we currently have 2 models we're using, and we're getting between 90 and 95% accuracy for Peru and Kenya data. So that's close to human accuracy unless you're really an expert. So that's comparable to volunteer students or so on. And we've done those comparisons. And this sounds all wonderful, and you're like, well, this solves all my problem. There's a lot more to this whole workflow. So first you need to organize your images, you need to extract your EXIF data, you run your models, then you need to process the output from the models and actually apply that to your images, rename your images and import that into a database. So there's a lot more involved here in this process. Going back to my question in the last sessions, a lot of people in ecology hate Python. And so we're working on, we're almost done with developing an R package that kind of wraps around all the machine learning libraries that are written in Python. And it really does that whole process of reading in images, running megadetector, running a species classifier, doing the post-processing, and you can output in different formats. And there was a lot of requests for that. Everybody I talked to, all the ecologists are like, yeah, we love the machine learning stuff, but everybody works in Python and we don't know Python. So this hopefully is going to be available within the next couple of months. We're cleaning it up, making it just so it's user-friendly and nice. We can release it on CRAN. We're going to include the pipeline for training your own model too. But the idea is that we can start sharing model across the community and use these models in different platforms. This is not the only one, this is one way. There's user interfaces that do that. User interfaces are great, not great if you have 1 million images. I think command line-based tools are still much more efficient. I'm almost done. So if you look at the whole workflow, we get the raw images, and it takes a few hours, if not a couple of days, to download them all from our camera drop, right? So that's your first step. You organize them into folders, and then you got to check all the dates and correct all that information, because that's generally there's a few cameras that didn't work, the date is wrong. And then that's finally, this is what you read about in the papers, but nobody talks about this part here, and nobody generally talks about this part here. So then you feed it through your pipeline, and then you need some kind of database. There's a couple of options out there, nothing that's I can recommend that's up to date. I think that's another big unknown. And if you want an offline database, Tony's going to talk about Wildlife Insights, which is an online system. But you still need to do quality control because your AI is only at 95%. So there's 5% of your images that are wrong. They're classified as the wrong species. So you're still going to go through this, and it's still going to take some time. The advantage is you can now go by species. So that's generally what we do. We filter, say, I'm only going to look at leopards, and I look at leopard, leopard, leopard. Oh, there's a cheetah, I change that. And then I keep looking at leopards. And it's really fast because it's less than a second per image as long as it's correct. And there's only 5% you're going to change. So compared to about 200 hours of doing it manually, we have maybe 7 hours we run through the ML pipeline, and then about 30 to 50 hours. It's still at 4 to 5 times faster. But again, there's a lot of promise on ML, but you have to think about the whole pipeline, and we can talk about that more. I think we have some time for discussion. This is just, I don't know if this actually plays, just because. There's some images from the Amazon, but that's kind of the output you get. You get a box around your animal, and you got to label it. Something else we're working on is how to deal with multi-species images. And with the boxes, we can deal with it, but the quality control gets a little bit more tricky there.
And I just wanted to say that at WCS, we work around the world in 13 regions, and we have a number of what we call global strongholds, where we focus our work, where we're focused on saving wildlife and wildlands. And our challenge is to support scientists in monitoring wildlife species, and to also support social scientists in monitoring communities. And some of the places that we're working include the Mongolian Gobi, the tropical forests of Papua New Guinea, and tropical savannas of Tanzania. So I'm going to talk about 3 conservation technology tools that we're using around the world. And the first tool is SMART, and specifically the SMART Survey plugin. So SMART is an integrated information platform that is used around the world primarily for monitoring law enforcement and site protection. I'm going to talk about the aspect of SMART that involves how we can use it for designing surveys. And why would we do this? Well, first of all, a little bit of background. So SMART has been up and running for about 10 years now, and it's put together, it's made available through a partnership between 10 organizations that have essentially paid for the development of this system, and we're giving it away for free to anybody who wants it. And currently we have more than 1,000 sites around the world that are using SMART in 80 countries. So we've got quite a big footprint. And that includes sites that are terrestrial, freshwater, and marine sites. So why would we use Smart Survey? So Smart Survey is a plugin that goes into the core software that allows you to turn your law enforcement monitoring tool into a tool that allows you to design surveys and collect data within a survey framework. So how does it work? It mimics the hierarchical framework of the SMART law enforcement monitoring tool and allows you to create a survey design or import a survey design that you might already have from another place. And once you plug in the survey plugin, it turns the menu into what you see here. Let's see if that works. Yeah, there we go. You get this little survey plugin that allows you to then create a survey design, create a sampling design, and set the parameters for collecting survey data. And what you're able to do is to take a data model and translate that data model into a format for collecting data using the Smart Mobile application. So where is this being used? It's being used in a number of places around the world, and one of the places where it's being used most is the Norbali Ndoki National Park in Congo. So Smart allows you to use the Smart Survey allows you to use the desktop software and the mobile application together to design surveys. You have a survey-specific data model configuration. It allows you to export this template to a device, a tablet, or a smartphone, so that you can collect data in the field. And the data can be data from a line transect or data from point counts. So it's very flexible. So then once you collect the data on your device, you can then import it into Smart, and you can run queries and summaries and create reports within Smart. You can also then export the data for analysis in other programs like Distance or Presence or R. So that's the first tool that I wanted to talk about. The second tool is Kobo Toolbox, and some of you are likely familiar with this tool. This is a tool for collecting more detailed survey and descriptive type survey data. So social science surveys. It's a free open source tool, and it's possible to design your survey template within the desktop and to create a survey form that you can then export to a device. It's very, very easy to create a survey form. And then using the Kobo Collect application, or Inketo, you can collect your data. So we have teams around the world who are using this approach for collecting social science survey type data, detailed questionnaire data in communities, and it works really well for that tool, for that purpose. You can also essentially collect any type of data from any type of question. You can collect photos and recordings, audio recordings, and you can record where you've done your surveys. All of that data can be imported back into the Kobo Toolbox application, and then it can be analyzed and reported within that application. So the third tool that I wanted to mention is Wildlife Insights. And this is a tool for managing camera trap data, and it's a publicly available tool that allows organizations to deploy sensors, usually camera traps, but also acoustic sensors, and to collect and collate their data, and to make that data publicly available. So it's possible to collect your data and to use a Kobo Toolbox application to set your metadata for your surveys. The data is imported into the computer, and it's possible to run the data through an optional AI detection tool. And then you can decide whether you want to share the data or what part of the data set you want to share, and then that data can become publicly available. You can also elect to keep some of the data not shared. And it's a tool that's being used by organizations around the world for managing their camera trap data. It's a really easy tool to use, and allows automated analytics and report generation, and it's supported by a partnership of organizations. So some common features across these three tools that make them useful for organizations. It allows us to be collecting field data that allows us to reduce the error in collecting the data. It's possible to back up your data in the cloud and access it anywhere. It's free. All of those tools are free and open source, and they're easy to use, and they encourage an inclusive approach for participation. So if you're deciding which tool to use, Smart Survey, it's a tool for use with any type of ecological survey where you want to collect data quickly, especially distance type data that you want to collect along line transects or point counts. Kobo Toolbox is a tool for collecting data that may be more detailed or descriptive in nature, especially social science type surveys. And Wildlife Insights is useful for camera trap survey type data. And if you're interested, then the links to those tools are right there. So in summary, there's great potential for linking these approaches with EarthRanger. And so I'm pretty excited to talk to you about how we can maybe integrate these approaches with EarthRanger through the projects like Gundy. So yeah, I'd just like to open up to, actually I'll hand over to to you first, and then we'll have some questions at the end. Thank you.
I'm just going to present to talk about generally what WRTI and our research department, before we move to the Wildlife Research and Training Institute, what we have been doing with regard to counting wildlife. For us, we have actually measured on mainly one method of counting wildlife in Kenya. That is aerial surveys. Aerial surveys. So with regard to this, we have two types of aerial surveys. We have the total aerial surveys, where we want to count everything, and sample aerial surveys, where we don't count everything, but it just, as the name says, just a sample survey. So for total aerial surveys have been adopted in Kenya since 1990s. And the purpose for this is that as a government institution, even when we are with the KWS, the thing was that the minister wants to know the number of elephants in Kenya. But the researcher wants, the researcher doesn't really want to do, when we say this is the total number of elephants that we have within the South ecosystem, the real researcher really has a lot of doubts when you give that figure. And when you say we have 10,000 elephants in the South ecosystem, they say, no, you need to give us plus or minus something. And that is why the sample counts have also been there. So, but sample counts have been adopted in Kenya since 1977 by another department of the government, the Directorate or the Department of Resource Surveys and Remote Sensing. And these two methods are totally different, but we have always been using them. For total counts, we used fixed wing aircrafts flying at between 300 and 400 feet above ground. And then what happens is that I do not have the pictorial presentation, but what happens is that we use either a 4-seat airplane or a 2-seat airplanes, in which case we normally have a front seat observer who normally helps the pilot to navigate, and then normally we have 2 rear seat observers. Within the aircraft, we also carry out some gadgets, like for instance, we go along with the GPSs. We carry GPSs to record the point. We carry cameras so that we can take photos of very large herds of elephants. And we also, what has happened of time is that the technology has really evolved. So earlier in 1990s, we used to have the analog type. We used to just use the topographical sheets. We'd fly. But nowadays, what is happening is that you can be able even to pre-plan in the office, load all the GPS tracks and everything to the pilot. So what is left with the pilot is just to navigate. And then one other advantage that we are putting is the use of voice recorders. We use voice recorders. So instead, when you observe some wildlife species, you shout the waypoint number. You also shout the species type into the voice recorder. So instead of using a data sheet. So for us, we have been using these 2 methods. A good example is that we used these 2 methods last year to count the entire country of Kenya. Yeah, we covered about 59% of the entire landmass of Kenya, which is about over 580 square kilometers. So if you get 59% of that, you'd really realize that we really covered a very big chunk of this country, because the government wanted to know where are these wildlife and how many are they. And when you are doing aerial surveys, whether it's aerial, whether it's a total or a sample, we normally count species that are normally larger than the Grand gazelle. Of course, you realize that both of these methods have their challenges. Of course, when you are flying, there is always the issue of the underbelly of the aircraft. There is always the issue of vegetation. There is always the issue of double counts, because you always have to turn. Sometimes when you are counting very large ecosystems like the South ecosystem, which is over 50,000 square kilometers, we count that system using about 10 aircrafts, but not less than 7 days. So the question comes in, you are counting this block, the following day you count the next block. Wildlife will always have to move. So ideally, we know that these are challenges that are experienced during whether there is total, or whether it's a total survey, or whether it's a sample survey. But with regard to the total counts, we always want to say that little chances that these are normally undercounts. So when we say we counted about 10,000 elephants within the Laikipia ecosystem, we mean this is the minimum amount. This is the minimum number of elephants that could have been counted within that system. For sample counts, the spacing is normally 5 kilometers. It's normally 5 kilometers, designated at 5 kilometers. And of course, geology statistics are normally used. They are applied so that you can be able to get the confidence, whatever levels for your data. One thing that we've actually come to realize is that both the total count in a system like the Masai Mara, where we have consistently undertaken both wet and dry counts systematically over years, and where we have also undertaken sample counts, these numbers normally compare, especially more so in ecosystems that are a bit open, where we don't experience a lot of vegetation. So for us as a research institution, beyond the research that we do, we have our constitutional mandate, we have our national mandate. We need to provide data, accurate data, so that, like for instance, right now, the CITES is coming up next week. We need to provide a situation of the elephant status in Kenya. We need to provide something like the giraffe status in Kenya. And the only way we can do it has always been, we've always adopted total area surveys. But of course, in northern parts of Kenya, where the land is very, very, some of the areas are very, very expansive, we've adopted sample surveys. So for us, we've been using those two methods to count and provide data and information to this country. Our website is is available right now. Is wrti.go.ke. WRTI. You can always Google wrti.go.ke. And within that, you can be able to get the report for the last area survey that we did in 2021 that was funded by the government of Kenya, plus most of our partners were also very much around. So anyway, when we count wildlife, we don't just count wildlife alone. We also want to count the human interference or human whatever presence. We want to establish, we estimate livestock, we estimate human settlements. We want to see what is happening to the ecosystems. Of course, because everything is highly being threatened within the Kenyan and African savannas because of increased human populations, increased livestock numbers. There are also challenges to do with climate change and so forth. But we hope that that we are able to provide accurate and precise data to the government that can actually be able to inform policy and decision making. Yeah, I would have loved to have a presentation to show for those people who have not been introduced to area and total surveys, and sample surveys, the methods, how they are done. But I think that could come at another time. So basically, those are that is the one main method that we use as a government institution to respond to matters of policy. But of course, total counts, sample counts are also amenable to scientific research. We do that. Besides that, last year, we also tried to use we also adopted drones. Drones is a new technology, but it has also its challenges. We tried with the Kenya Airways. The problem has been there's few challenges with regard to legislation. There are challenges to do with how far it can be able to reach. And when you're talking about a sub-ecosystem, about 40,000 square kilometers, so like keep your 60,000 square kilometers, yeah, it's really quite a lot. And basically, we think this is a technology for the future, and it's a technology that can really be adopted for us to be able to get accurate information, especially more so for very small protected areas with very critical species like the rhino in various community conservancies and in small protected areas like Nairobi National Park. But it's not that small, it's about 117 square kilometers. So the other technology that as an institute that we have been trying was the use of artificial intelligence. The use of high satellite imagery coupled with the cameras. So you can use cameras to take photos of wildlife species that you can use to link with the high satellite images for training. That's something that we are trying out in Masai Mara. It's a research that is ongoing. I'm part of it, together with the SI Smithsonian, the Smithsonian Institute. So I will not talk about camera traps. Camera traps already, my friend has talked about it because we are using it. The methods is very well elaborated. We have also been using trackers. Those are other methods that we are using to get wildlife numbers in this country. Basically, what I can say is that in terms of what future holds for aerial surveys in Kenya, we definitely want to think that we are going to move more and more into use of drone technology, into use of artificial intelligence, and more so, we also want to think that we shall be adopting less and less of total and sample surveys because they are really expensive. Yeah, they are really, the running costs for aircrafts, the crews, and everything. They are really expensive. And again, some of these ecosystems are really getting constricted because human population is increasing. Where we used to count 10 or 20 years ago is no longer the same extent that we are counting today because these areas are community, they have been subdivided, and because of such challenges, wildlife is getting more and more constricted into the protected areas. But however, this does not mean that wildlife in Kenya is found only in protected areas. No, most of it is still found in outside of protected areas within communal and private lands. I think that's basically what I wanted to say, and say thank you for listening to me.
We're gonna get to the good stuff. I think it's already been highlighted quite well, and if you're in this room, you've probably dealt with big ecological data. We have so many sensor technologies today that enable us to collect this very high resolution data over like vast spatial and temporal scales. And then, of course, the big hurdle to using that data for ecological inference is the fact that it just takes such a soul-crushingly large amount of time and energy to actually sit down and process all of that data. And AI is something we're working on. I mean, historically, I think how many graduate students have whiled away the years processing camera trap data. I'm going to talk about one tool for doing this. So this isn't as flashy as AI. It's not as soul-crushing as using a graduate student. It might not even be the best use case for every single situation where you have data. I think as someone who's worked with citizen science for a long time, I see a lot of people jumping into using citizen science as a solution without really thinking about the entire process and the hidden costs. So focusing on volunteers as data processors, and really about 10 years ago, I'm dating myself now, but the advent of online citizen science in the last couple of decades has really opened up these new horizons and allowed thousands or millions of volunteers to actually start accessing the data that we collect, and really helping us to unlock new frontiers in advanced scientific research. So again, about a decade ago, sorry, I'm very bad with this mic, I can hear my voice going up and down. But in 2012, the lab that I was a part of partnered with an online citizen science platform called the Zooniverse to start putting some of the camera trap data that we've been collecting online. So we'd been running a grid of camera traps in Serengeti National Park in Tanzania, 200 camera traps. At this point, we'd been running them for 2 years. I don't know how many tens of millions of images we collected in that meantime. We had years and years of backlog of data. So we partnered with the Zooniverse, which is again I think it's still the world's largest online citizen science platform. And what they do is they put object annotation tasks, they decompose them into simple steps, and then crowdsource those steps to online volunteers. So we worked with them to build their camera trap interface. So if you go to really any online camera trap citizen science project, you're presented with a photo from a camera trap, a list of possible species it could be. We have all sorts of filters. If you haven't seen The Lion King or you don't know your African animals, we have all kinds of tips and tricks to help you narrow down, what could this animal possibly be. And then we often ask our volunteers to do things like tell us how many animals are in the photo, are there juvenile animals, are there male animals, and what are those animals doing? So with this interface, when we started putting our citizen science online, I think we managed to process our 2-year backlog of camera trap data in about 3 months. So this process was, at the time, quite revolutionary. And Zooniverse is not now Zooniverse is not the only online camera trap platform. And we're not the only online camera trap project. I think there's something like between 70 to 100 camera trap projects on the Zooniverse, and there are other platforms, this is a non-exhaustive list, that have also started putting camera trap images online and engaging volunteers to help move through that data. The thing I really like about citizen science is that it is very accessible, both to researchers and to volunteers. So building a website like I showed you, no coding skills, no website design skills. I just wanted to give people a peek under the hood. We have these interfaces on the Zooniverse now, and it's plug and chug. You name your project, you describe your project, you put up your pictures. It's a very simple process. It's very easy to get into, which might be a bit of a trap, but but setting up your own citizen science website is quite simple, and again, free and accessible. So benefits of using citizen science, you get your data processed. Caveat, eventually. But again, back 10 years ago when this first came on the scene, this was a really big deal. This really allowed ecologists to start realizing the potential of some of these long-term, large-scale ecological monitoring projects. And I think there's a lot of other reasons that are worth using citizen science for, in addition to processing data. So you get global visibility for your project. Your project is online. Millions of people can see that you are trying to conserve elephants in the Masai Mara. You get public involved and invested in ongoing conservation efforts, and you start reconnecting people. I feel like humanity at large is losing its connection with nature, and this is a good way to kind of bring people back to that. And there's lots of ways for you to engage with the volunteers and do this kind of communication and showcase your work. One of the features that we have on the Zooniverse and many of these similar websites are discussion boards where your volunteers can connect directly with you as a scientist. So they can ask questions, if they see an image with something very weird on it, they ask you what it is, they flag their favorite photos, there's places to talk about ecology and conservation. And in that sense, I think it's a really amazing tool for outreach. And also an amazing tool for education. So I would say now most of the people who visit who use our citizen science platforms are probably educators. We definitely see huge spikes in usage during the school year and dips in usage over the summer vacation. But a lot of teachers build citizen science into their curriculum. It's a very real way for students to be involved in the scientific process. And we've done a lot of work to capitalize on that and to expand that impact to citizen science. So we've created curricula for everyone from middle schoolers through to undergraduates. We have some great online widgets and classrooms that allow students to visualize and explore real data. And again, because we have so much data, students can actually ask real ecological questions. I feel like nothing's more off-putting to an undergraduate biology student than doing an experiment on fruit flies and everyone dies in the first week and then you quit science and you go into art history. With big camera trap data sets, you can actually find real patterns in these data. You can answer real questions. It's a great way to get people motivated to become ecologists like the rest of us. So these are some of the hidden costs, which again, I think citizen science can be powerful if used correctly. I think there's a lot of things that people don't think about before investing in citizen science platforms. So super easy to build a platform, not so easy to maintain a platform. These platforms run on the passion of your volunteers. They run because the volunteers are invested in what you're doing and they care about these projects. And if you don't maintain that communication with them, if you're not engaging with them, if you're not showing them that because they spent 6 hours classifying camera trap photos instead of rewatching The Office for the 7th time, that there's been a conservation impact, if you're not actively going out and campaigning and connecting with them, they're going to go to one of the 180 other online camera trap projects and put their time there or go back to Netflix. So you really do need someone completely dedicated to reaching out and connecting with and being a face for your program, which takes a lot of work. Also, these volunteers are untrained. There is no bar you have to pass to become a citizen scientist. You don't take a test, there's no training. And so you get a lot of false negatives and you get a lot of false positives. So how are you going to get research quality data from your non-research audience? And so there are things we have done. There are systems that we have in place that help with this. So we rely a lot on the wisdom of the crowds. So the idea that if many people assess a value or a classification of something, if you take the consensus answer, that tends to be right. And so we know that if you get about 10 people to tell you what's in an image and you take the consensus, you get actually quite a highly accurate classification. You get good data out of that. How many classifiers it takes and how you kind of aggregate those responses varies across site, species. It can vary through time. It can vary by user. And so you have to do a lot of evaluation to figure out how many users do I need to look at this data? How do I extract the best data from this without making like every photo be looked at by 30 people, which just increases your classification task exponentially. There's also issues of security and ethics. Maybe you work in a site with rhino or with elephant or with pangolin or with poachers or with tourists who don't know their photos being taken. Do you want to just throw those photos up on the internet for everyone to see? Maybe not. So that some situations you might actually have to pre-process that data and go through and figure out how do I take out all of the pangolins so that the cyber poachers of this world aren't going to go and nab them the next day. Okay, this is why I'm bitter and jaded. I think citizen science has kind of gone through a bit of a technology hype cycle. So like I was saying, when we started and we were the first citizen science project out there, years of data classified in weeks. But as you can see, the number of projects that rely on citizen science has sort of increased exponentially over the last decade, but the number of people who volunteer to be citizen scientists has not increased quite so fast. And so we're at a point now where I think we've overwhelmed our user base, and we really have to think a lot more conscientiously about what do we do with citizen science to make it a better tool for what we want it to do. And so this is my tiny little bit of AI. This is my tiny little bit of tech in here. This is one of the big advances that I think is going to start pushing citizen science forward again. And so this idea of integrating AI, I think in the citizen science world we call it crowd AI, but pairing AI, which is not perfect, with humans, which can't process a lot of data. And so the idea is you take your image, you pass it through an AI. The AI does the first sweep. The AI might be very highly confident on zebra because you have 10,000 images to train your AI on, and it's really good. There might be a lot of images that are probably honey badger or something the AI has never seen that it produces with a very low confidence score. Low confidence images, you run those through people. You put those through your citizen science program. You direct that human pattern understanding brain goes to a small but difficult subset of data, and you accept the rest of the images classified by AI as the truth. And you can use both of those data then to keep retraining these models and making them better and better through time. So this idea of humans in the loop of iterative retraining is something that is now being incorporated into citizen science platforms. This is a very gross figure that just shows you what I said on the previous slide, that data coming into these citizen science platforms, you can go through and there are different ways for you to integrate object detection or species classification into your citizen science platform. I just wanted to show you again, this is a peek under the hood. The process isn't as gross as this. If you wanted to implement this, there are user-friendly tools that help you make decisions about if 5 people agree with the AI, you take it as truth. If 2 people agree with the AI, you take it as truth. Different kinds of decision trees that you can build into the process so you have fewer people looking at each image and you move through all of your images a lot faster. And so I think the statistics, if I can remember them off the top of my head, you can achieve 90% accuracy on classification data at 20% of the manual human classification effort if you use a system that combines both. And so what that means kind of practically is that data that we know from our personal camera trap citizen science programs, we can cut our data classification time in half using this kind of a system. And so in half means that right now we're looking at a year of camera trap data from 200, 300 cameras. It takes about a year to process online using citizen science alone. Combining it with AI, it takes about 6 months. Probably there are more things we could do to speed that process along. I think there's a lot of development these days in apps with citizen science, so putting citizen science into more kinds of applications where people can connect with it. Right now, these apps tend to work very well with binary classifications, so they're very much with, like Tinder, where you swipe left or right, it's a yes or no. Not so good if you have to choose like one of 47 different species that you think is in that photo. So we could probably do some more app development, thinking about ways to motivate citizen scientists to actually want to engage with your platform more. Gamification seems to be a big field right now, and that could be anything from slapping a leaderboard onto your citizen science website through to augmented reality or Pokemon Go, or like there's a whole universe out there of things we could do with gamification. And the last thing I wanted to say is there's a lot we could do too to increase the accessibility of our citizen science platforms. The majority of our user base comes from North America and Europe, surprisingly enough, but our data comes from around the globe. So there are features, you can translate these platforms into different languages, but I think we can do a lot more to kind of put the data stewardship back into the hands of the people who the data actually affects. So all you tech people, solve these, please. Yeah, so that was citizen science in 10 minutes. Thank you so much.